The year was 1761. A schooner named the Octavius was docked in the port of London. It had a crew of 28 men who were busy loading the cargo on board, destined for China. Among the crew was the captain and his wife and son. The journey was long, but eventually the ship and the crew safely arrived in China, where they unloaded their cargo and took the opportunity to enjoy being on land after so long at sea. Some of the more superstitious men among the crew had expressed their discomfort that there was a woman on board. After all, women were known to be bad luck at sea. These concerns, though, were largely dismissed by the rest of the men, especially after such a calm and safe voyage from England to the Far East. A couple of days later, the crew loaded up the new cargo, goods bound for England, and prepared for the long journey home. As the ship left the port in China and began to take to the open sea, the captain made the comment that the weather was unusually warm and decided that they should sail home via the Northwest Passage, a voyage that, at this time, had not yet been accomplished. And so the Octavius headed for the Northwest Passage, as the captain commanded, an unknown and treacherous route, but would nevertheless be quite an achievement if successful. The Octavius eventually reached the waters north of Alaska, where the captain's theories about the climate being unusually warm were proven to be nonsense. It was freezing, the wind howled, and the snow fell. To the crew's horror, there came the sound of creaking and moaning as the ship ground to a halt, trapped in the sea ice, and it was not going to budge. The captain knew that this was the end of the line. There was no way a schooner was going to break this ice. The weather was abysmal, and the crew didn't have long at all before they fell victim to the cold. This was the last that anyone heard of the vessel, her crew, or her cargo. The Octavius was declared missing. All hands lost. More than a decade had passed. On October the 11th, 1775, a whaling ship named the Herald was working the waters off Greenland. It was a misty day, and the sea was eerily calm. But there was good hunting to be had in these waters, and the crew sensed a good catch. One of the spotters noticed a faint shape in the mist off the starboard side, and within a short moment he realized that it was another ship. It had been a long time since they'd seen other people, and the Herald's captain assumed that this was another whaling vessel. He thought that if they pulled alongside it, then they could find out whether they'd found any whales in the waters they'd sailed that day. As they sailed closer, they realized that this ship was weather-beaten. The sails were tattered and torn, and hanging limply from the masts. There was no crew on the deck, at least not that they could see. The ship just eerily and gently sailed forwards at the speed of the low wind. The entire crew that was on deck of the Herald was now watching on the starboard side. They were very unnerved, wondering why this ship seemed abandoned. The Herald slowly sailed past this empty ship, and then, by order of the captain, the helmsman steered around starboard so as to pull up next to it on the mysterious ship's port side. As they did this, the crew saw the name Octavius. The Herald steered in closer, and grappling hooks were cast onto the eerie ship, catching onto the main deck. They heaved the ship in closer, tying the ropes off and then dropping anchor. The Herald's captain and a team of his men then boarded the ship. The wind was picking up a bit now, the tattered sails blowing and flapping. The mist was also far thicker, with the air noticeably colder. When on deck, the captain ordered for some lanterns to be lit. "All right, lads, stay alert. Look for the hatch and get it open. There might be people below deck." One by one, they descended the ladder into the darkness below. No sooner had a couple of men gone down below deck than a scream was heard. The lantern the first man was carrying revealed a corpse, frozen stiff and standing against the wall. His eyes were wide open, and he looked remarkably well preserved. More of the crew descended below and spread out among the darkness. All of them remained silent. The gentle lap of the waves and the creaking of the rigging was all that could be heard. More and more men appeared, lying down, or crouched or sitting, completely frozen, completely dead. They found the dead crew's quarters, where around 20 men lay frozen and lifeless. The crew was growing scared now. The captain walked forward, holding his lantern out in front of him. He looked at the faces of all the dead men. Almost all of them had their eyes open. They headed to the captain's cabin, where they found the Octavius's captain sitting frozen at his desk. His quill was still in his hand, and his logbook was open. The inkwell and all the other items still lay exactly in their place. The men saw a woman and a boy frozen in the corner of the room on a bunk under a blanket. By the captain's desk, there was also a frozen sailor holding a tinderbox. The Herald's captain held his lantern right next to the face of the Octavius's captain. There was still a glint in his eye. The crew were quite terrified now. "I think we should leave here now, boys. Calmly, but quickly, return to the Herald," the captain said. The crew were glad to hear this, and proceeded to return to the top deck. They took with them only the captain's logbook. It was frozen solid, and the middle pages came loose from the book binding. They arrived back on the Herald with just the first and the last pages of the logbook, which were enough for the captain of the Herald to determine at least a part of the story of the voyage. Once the Herald's crew were all back aboard their own ship, they cut the ropes holding the ships together and pulled up their anchor. A couple of the men wanted to sink it, but most had a bad feeling about that idea. They were to leave it be. The men were in agreement that this ship was cursed, and so it was to be untouched, lest they met a similar fate. They cast off and sailed away, the ghostly ship fading away back into the mist. That night, the men that were in the boarding party told the rest of the crew about what they'd seen, and talked long into the night. The captain, however, sat by candlelight in his cabin, looking over the pages of the Octavius's logbook. The last entry had been on the 11th of November, 1762, which meant the ship had been lost in the Arctic for 13 years. There was mention of the attempt to take the Northwest Passage. Its last recorded position, while the crew was still alive, was 75 degrees north, 160 degrees west, about 250 miles north of Barrow, Alaska. Yet, they were near Greenland. The ship must have broken loose from the ice at some stage and completed its voyage through the passage and come out on the other side, where it met the Herald. Despite being dead, the Octavius's crew had continued sailing along the Northwest Passage. No other ships ever reported seeing the Octavius again. Did it run aground and sink? Maybe. Or perhaps it's still out there, sailing those lonely Arctic waters, crewed by the damned.